Hello, Year 8. Well done for completing the work last week on why men volunteered to fight in World War One. Today we're going to explore the type of war they would be going into. So we're going to look at what was the experience of trench warfare like. So just pause this pre-recorded lesson, put the title, today's date and classwork into your books. What was the experience of trench warfare like? Lesson. Okay, just to explain what we mean about the trenches on the Western Front, we've just got this little information and map section. So, just to remind you, by December 1914, the Schlieffen Plan had failed. Remember, that was Germany's plan to win the war quickly in the summer and autumn of 1914. So the war was no longer a war of movement. The Germans gave up hope of a quick victory. So soldiers dug trenches to escape from artillery and machine gun fire. A line of trenches stretched from Calais in the north to the French Alps in the south. The war was in stalemate. So if you look at this line that I'm shading across now, essentially by the end of 1914, millions of men were in trenches facing each other in World War One. On the left-hand side, the west side, you had the British, the Belgian and the French forces, and facing them in the east, on the right-hand side, you had German and Austrian forces. So that's what we understand by the term the trenches on the Western Front. So all I need you to do now is just pause the video, put a little subheading that says the trenches on the Western Front, and just make a quick copy of that paragraph you can see just on the left side of this page. So you'll need to pause the video now. Okay, now we know that a line of trenches stretched for hundreds of miles all the way through Belgium and France down towards the Swiss Alps. We need to understand what these trenches look like. So if we study this image of a trench closely, we'll see what exactly the trenches were like. So you'll note there's a soldier in the middle. He is facing the enemy. So he's using a wooden periscope to look over the trench to see the enemy trenches. He's protected by a parapet. Literally in French, that means to protect the head. It's made of sandbags. His trench is protected by barbed wire to make it difficult for the enemy to attack. There are wooden or iron supports holding up the sides of the trench, otherwise the soil would just cave in. There's a fire step because the trench is quite deep, so if the soldiers need to fire over the top of the parapet, they would stand on that step. There's obviously what's called duck boards, wooden boards at the bottom. That's to prevent the soldiers from having to stand ankle or knee deep in mud and water which collected at the bottom of the trench. There's dug into the side of the trench some basic sleeping and rest arrangements for the soldiers. These are called dugouts, so quite literally somewhere where the soldiers could shelter away from the rain and the wind, dug into the side of the trench. And then there is the rear side of the trench, the parados, literally protect the back. And you've got sandbags protecting the sides of the trench and to shield soldiers from any shell blasts that might fall at the rear. So I need you to study this image of a trench closely, and I need you to try and remember all the aspects that you can. So I would pause this video for a moment and just try and remember every aspect of the trench. Okay, now you can print out a copy of this trench if you're lucky enough to have a printer and get that stuck in your book. If you don't, I'd like you to spend just a couple of minutes making a really neat copy of this cross section of a trench. Once you've done that neat copy, this is a memory exercise. So what you need to do is try and remember every detail of the trench from the previous slide and label your copy. Remember, so that's things like the parados, the parapet, the barbed wire, the fire step, the duck boards. And if you're struggling, obviously you can go back to the slide, the previous slide, and have a look. So I would pause this slide for a moment now, get your image copied in or get it printed out, and then get it labeled. Okay, well done for getting your trench drawn and getting all the aspects labeled. Now we're going to find out a little bit more about life in the trenches. To do that, you're going to need to just use a device to scan the QR code that you can see at the bottom right here. That will take you to a BBC website, and I just want you to explore that website. And as you explore it, I need you in your books to write down 5 interesting facts about the experiences of soldiers in the trench that you didn't know before. So again, you might need to use your phone or another digital device just to scan that QR code. So again, pause this video, scan the QR code, and write down, after you've researched them, those 5 facts about trench warfare that you've found. Okay, this final task is to appreciate what were the trenches like from a bird's eye view, that is, looking down upon them from above. So I'm just going to talk you through this. So in the middle, where you can see the shell holes, the circles that have been sketched, is no man's land. That's the strip of land, usually between 50 to 200 meters wide, that separated the British, French, and Belgian trenches on the left to the German trenches on the right. So if we look at the left-hand trenches first, which will be the British trenches in this diagram, you have the front line trench, and that's the nearest to the enemy. So in front of the front line trench, you have all the barbed wire lines to defend your trench against attack. You have what are called sapper trenches, where you can go out into no man's land to spy and listen on your enemy. You have to the rear a support trench. That's in case your front line is taken over. So you've got somewhere to retreat from. And connecting the front line and the support trench, you have things called communication trenches as well. And you'll note that the trenches are always in a kind of zigzag pattern. They're never entirely straight. This is on purpose to protect soldiers against shell fire in the trenches and make it difficult for any enemy who enters the trench. There are corners and places where the enemy could be stopped and ambushed. So if you look at the right hand side, which is the German side of the trenches, things are a little bit different on this side. The Germans never really intended for the line to move much. They'd taken over a lot of French and Belgian land, and they wanted to keep hold of that land. So they made their trenches much more permanent. So you can see that they built underground dugouts that were really quite complicated. They built concrete defences. You can see the pillbox there with the machine gun in it. So the German trenches were actually quite a lot stronger than the British trenches. The British trenches were never made that strong because they were never meant to be permanent. We were meant to attack the Germans and force them out of France and Belgium. So that's a bird's eye view of the trenches. What I'd like you to do, and if you can do it as neatly as you can, I'd just like you to make one final diagram. So just make a copy of the aerial view of trench warfare for me and put those labels onto it. You don't need to do the cross section at the bottom, you just need to do the aerial view. So it's quite a straightforward diagram. That's the final task for today.